explain your interpretation of the relevance of the Constitution today. And we'll start with Chris.
So, the relevance of the Constitution today, it would be impossible as a judge to interpret any law, to interpret any case, to interpret any factual situation with which you're presented, because the Constitution is always used as a reference point. We look to the Constitution to determine what is right, what is appropriate, and decisions are made and overturned based on whether the Constitution allows that or not. So I think all statutes would be interpreted in light of both our federal and our state constitutions. As a judge, when I was sworn in, I took an oath to uphold the Constitution. That's something that I'm very clear on, and something that I think is quite important as a judge, that you always look to what the Constitution provides and have that be your guide in terms of the decisions you make.
Thank you. Darren, question? You're next.
Well, thank you. As a lawyer, I am also sworn to uphold the Constitution as well. Now, when the Constitution was originally ratified, I should say, in 1791, it was based on a limited government. As we look at it today, it was originally formed to protect and give us our liberty. It was designed and implemented to secure us in our pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. As we sit here today, it's not designed to solve everybody's problems. However, our founding fathers implemented the 10th Amendment. And it basically states that powers not granted to the federal government or restricted by the states are reserved for the states and the people. We still have a lot of powers, and the Constitution is alive today. And as a judge, I'm sworn to protect that as well.
Thanks, Paul. Well, the Constitution is central. It's the central point where all U.S. law comes from. No other law can or should withstand any infringement upon the Constitution. In court, the Constitution is much like the Bible is in church. It's the guidebook that we look for directions in making decisions. A judge needs to know both what rights you have and what the limits of those rights are. In the Constitution, there's something called the Supremacy Clause. And that means that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Federal law trumps state law and the state constitution. I have had the privilege of taking a Supremacy Clause case from Justice Court through our appellate courts. I was appointed by the California Supreme Court to argue it in front of them. I won, and I defended that decision in the U.S. Supreme Court. I consider the foundation of our society important enough that I spend my free time reading things like the Federalist Papers, the history and battles of the Revolution, and biographies of people like George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and Lincoln. The Constitution asserts itself all the time. And as a NRA member and a member of the Del Norte Rod and Gun Club, I can tell you that I've studied the Second Amendment and I understand the right to defend oneself and to bear arms. How we regulate signs pervades everything, and my cases have dealt with the First, Fourth, 10th, and 14th Amendment. Thank you.
Next question. As a judge, what is your personal responsibility in dealing with habitual offenders? We'll start off with you, Darren.
Everybody knows a victim of crime. Everybody knows a victim of crime. If you don't, hi, I'm Darren McElfresh. I'm a victim of crime. When I was 19 years old, I worked in a restaurant as a night manager. In walked a gentleman by the name of Willie Wade Jr., who I did not know. Took out a chrome revolver and stuck it in my face, walked me back to the safe room, put me on my knees, hands behind the head, and said if I didn't open that safe in 30 seconds, he would execute me then and there. Somehow opened that safe. Willie Wade Jr. was caught. I testified at a hearing. He pled the case out. You know what he received? A slap on the hand. Within 1 month of being released, he did it again. To this day, I still remember the cold steel barrel in the back of my head. Repeat offenders, habitual offenders, do not belong in our streets. As a judge, my obligation is to keep Willie Wade Jr. from creeping into your doors, someone who's been convicted at night, and causing grief to you. That is my promise as a judge. Thank you.
Chris? Actually, Don.
There's pervasive community opinion here that there are too many repeat offenders on the street and that there are too many plea bargains. The DA's office is overwhelmed with cases, and they have, frankly, less experience than the defense attorneys. So they're cautious about their cases and taking them to trial. That's where the judge's responsibility kicks in. A judge needs to look carefully at each plea bargain, and if necessary, before accepting them, ask to look at the police report so that judge can evaluate whether those cases should be settled at that level. And when appropriate, the judge should say, look, let's just do our job and try the case. If the defendant is innocent, he should walk. If the defendant is guilty, then he should get the punishment the crime deserves. I don't have any more interest in seeing the innocent plead guilty than I do the guilty go free. I just ask that the parties don't tie my hands with a sentence deal that dictates what I should do as punishment for that individual. I'd ask for a waiver so that the dismissed counts could be considered in the sentencing. And I think I owe that to the public. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of looking at habitual offenders, I think it's important to consider two different types of habitual offenders. The other candidates have focused on serious crime habitual offenders, and certainly we see those offenders within the system, and I think the system needs to deal with those offenders very strictly and carefully. The reality is over 90% of cases get plea bargains, so it would be impossible to say that we're not going to plea bargain as a general rule. However, in serious cases, those are the situations where you do need to take a hard line. In looking at habitual offenders, though, I also consider the lower level offenders, the public intoxication, the trespassers, the people who harass you every time you go to Safeway, and all of you live in this community and know those type of habitual offenders as well. And those type of offenders create problems for the court because they create a huge number of cases, and the punishments for the crimes, it's difficult to really deal with that population. And as a judge, you have an obligation not only to impose sentences, but there are situations where alternatives should be offered as well. And this is where I think we have to look to innovative programs. First of all, our tribes have implemented wellness courts and have worked with getting habitual offenders into those types of programs. I think as a judge, you need to work and be able to work with other people in the community to come up with other innovative programs. In other counties, there are behavioral courts where people who have mental health issues also come to court. So I think it's important for us to explore other options because the system of running people through the system, arrest, rearrest, and punishment is not working for our system at this point.
If you could hold your applause until the end, it'll be better. And if anybody,
I like them.
and if anybody has any questions that they want to ask during the 15-minute period from audience questions, if you raise your hand, the girls will come around and give you a card. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. And the questions go to all the candidates. Each question, all the candidates will answer each question.